Alright, so that was a song from the second Grave album that had a nice intro riff. I thought it would be good to open the show with that. Let's get to the fracturing point between Swedish death metal and Norwegian black metal. See, it started out they were sort of friends because, like I said, Dead, the original vocalist of Mayhem, well, technically not the original, but the famous Mayhem vocalist, the one that shot himself, he was in a band with one of the Entombed guys called Morbid way back in the 80s before he joined Mayhem. And you even have guys from Entombed helping Darkthrone produce their first album back when they were playing more of a death metal style thing. But later on, the big four of Swedish death metal, well, really, Dismember excluded, Dismember kept it pretty real, but the other members of the big four started experimenting with influences from other types of music besides the purely metal stuff and adopting a bit more of a rock and roll attitude, which the Norwegian black metal movement kind of arose as a counter movement to, since they wanted to keep everything very evil and have an 80s metal vibe to what they were doing. So how did this turn out for Grave? Well, let's check out the first song on their third album, Soulless. This one is called Turning Black.
Bitches leave.
Very important to start the song with a RoboCop sample, as we're all well aware. So the guys in Grave, they're all wearing prong shirts in the liner notes for this album, and you can hear the influence of that band and what they're doing here. However, this is still fairly complex music in terms of songwriting, as you'll see while we go through the song. Here comes the response to that intro riff. You can hear them doing that whole Slayer polyphonic thing in a new groove-based way that's pretty interesting here. And then, there we go. We're going ahead in the song to the grindcore part using the magic of technology. Now we're talking. So this is the old school tremolo picked death metal riff. You gotta love Jorgen Sandstrom's vocalist. He's a very underrated guy. Love his vocalist. I mean his vocals. Fuck! Whatever. So yeah, this is still very much death metal, even with the incorporation of groove influences. The original Grave logo was actually almost a carbon copy of the Slayer logo, and you can still hear that massive Slayer influence in their sound, especially with solo trade-offs like this, with lots of whammy bar shit. And it's time for a breakdown. So that's the thing, is hidden influence on a lot of 90s hardcore, especially the beatdown variety shit, is very Swedish. It's kind of funny because then the melodic death metal bands from the other big Swedish city, Gothenburg, they influenced a lot of hardcore stuff too. You got a lot of those melodic metalcore guys took influence from At the Gates and such. Yeah, a lot of creative stuff here. Playing the same riff, but varying up like the cadence they play it at, and switching up the drums to make it a little more interesting and varied. So I think it's safe to say, we can say Grave, they might have changed their style, but they didn't really sell out in the strictest sense of the word. This is pretty unique and interesting stuff, especially for 1994. Not too much in the death metal world sounded like that. So, Later on, Grave, Jorgen Sandstrom left, joined Entombed. Bafflingly, Entombed didn't use him as a vocalist. I don't know what the hell that choice was about. He's way better than LG Petrov. I don't care who hears me say that. But yeah, after Jorgen left, the songwriting went downhill a little bit, and I wouldn't say you shouldn't bother with any Grave album after the third one, but whatever. That happens with a lot of bands, especially Swedish bands tend to put out 3 great albums and then just kind of shit the bed. So up next, let's see what our old pals in Unleashed are up to. So this is the lead-off track off their third album, Across the Open Sea. This one's called To Asgard We Fly. This album is probably their most melodically complex, as you can hear with how this is kind of like a 3-stage melody they have going here. There was that intro part, now there's this linking part, and in a bit it's going to hit its conclusion. But yeah, a lot of palm muting, a little bit of a feel to everything. That's kind of cool. So yeah, this album, I'd say maybe their best. I don't know. Second one's pretty good too. This one's definitely more melodic and complex than that one though. At the same time, the influences from old school heavy metal have been stepped up. This is the conclusion I was talking about. That initial 3-stage melody, which is going to loop back into the intro riff right here. Later on, this song hits a breaking point, and you get something that sounds like this. So, definitely within the same compositional universe as that earlier 3-stage thing, but now we've hit a mid-paced portion where they're breaking it down for us. Also in this album, they stepped up the whole Viking theme a lot. The lyrics get a little bit more philosophical, at least for, Swedish death metal, made by guys in their early 20s. So nice conclusion there, mein Freunde, Johnny Hedlund. However, on the album after this, they tried to do the Grave thing by incorporating more groove and stuff, but
You serious?
Oh, those guys are fags! Gay! Fucking quit!
yeah, no, fourth Unleashed album sucked, and they sort of came back after that, but it's all been fairly generic compared to their classic albums. However, they're still very much a band worth seeing live, so there is that. Entombed. Last week I played you something off their second album, and I realized I was remiss not starting at the beginning with them, but whatever. So here's the sound progression of Entombed. Their first album sounds like this. It's like a chainsaw-esque guitar sound. So yes, fast, primitive, evil, recorded in 1989, so very early Swedish death metal, some of the earliest. Then they did my favorite album by them, Clandestine, where they started working in a lot of hard rock and progressive rock influences, resulting in some very complex music that sounded like this. So immediate hard rock influences, but this is also a much more complicated riff than what you heard on their previous album. Also that weird dance beat that Nicka Andersson, the mad genius of Swedish death metal, doing on drums is very interesting. That was like a guitar fill, the drums following the guitars following the drum fill there. That was kind of cool. Vocals not as good as early Entombed, but that's because my boy Nick Anderson and the original Entombed vocalist got in a fight over a girl, and he had to leave for a while before he came back for their third one. Whoops. So yeah, high quality, complex stuff, heavy rock influence, but also very progressive in a way. Then we get to their third album where they've ramped up the hard rock influences and substantially simplified the music, kind of playing this weird sort of punk, rock, Kiss type thing. So, immediate 70s rock influence hits you in the head. The song's called Hollow Man off of Wolverine Blues. They did a weird marketing campaign with this album where they named the album after a Jelly Roll Morton song because they were getting into like roots rock, but Earache decided to sell it as a tie-in with Marvel Comics because, oh, there's a guy named Wolverine. This part rules, watch this. It's the good shit. So, I'm gonna surprise you guys. I actually dig this album. It's definitely simple, but the songwriting is still pretty ingenious for what it is. And though I do prefer Jorgen Sandstrom, I think LG Petrov is a great vocalist. So Wolverine Blues gets the Jub stamp of approval, and I'm sure there's some elitists out there that are upset with me for that. However, after this album, they did one more album with Nick Anderson that wasn't so great. Then he left, and their albums got pretty shitty. Entombed still tours nowadays, and even they kind of realized what they did because they usually just play songs off their first 3 albums. So they come through town, go check them out. But yeah, definitely see why the black metalers were not so keen on the direction Entombed ended up going in. Lastly, we get to Dismember. This is the one band that made good albums their whole career. So I would say the 2 most successful bands out of like this whole transitionary period of Swedish death metal would be Grave and Dismember. But like I said earlier, Grave kind of fell off after their 3rd album, whereas Dismember kept pumping out good shit. So let's check out something from their 2nd album to see an example of their interesting, almost kind of orchestral songwriting. So again, the all-important chainsaw guitar tone, but with a lot of melody to it. And now we're going to get to a build-up to something miraculous. So melodic bass playing from Richard Cabeza, who joined for this album. He was also in Unanimated, and he's a pretty important Swedish musician. Now we're talking. So this part coming up, it actually reminds me of something you might hear in an Italian horror movie from the 70s that played with heavy fucking guitars. There's a lot of Dismember that sounds like that. Because you get this repeated, arpeggiated melody with a heavier sort of thing underlying it, which is going to hit a really cool part right about now. That's the good shit. And this would set the tone for the rest of their career. They're all about blending very primitive, fast, and evil death metal with a sense of melody borrowed from new wave of British heavy metal bands like Iron Maiden and Angel Witch and such, but making it substantially more evil sounding. And more complex, too. You thought that would have been the end of the song, but now they've got this weird tech death riff going on. Some good shit, man. And now we have melodic solos from, I think Daniel Bloomquist does this one. I have to look it up at some point. And great fucking vocals, as always, from Matt Karki. So yeah, that song was called Reborn in Blasphemy, if you couldn't tell. So yeah, really good shit. And they kept that up because, you know, that album came out, I want to say 93, and then here's what their album from 2004 sounds like. So a little bit more melodic. We're into a nasty breakdown right here. That's what I'm talking about. So yeah, you can hear the Iron Maiden thing going on with the harmonies, but they're doing it in that kind of death metal way, and they're making it a little bit more complex. Every Dismember album They sound a little bit alike, but they're each unique. Like, one might have more thrash influence. They've got their third album has a lot of that grave-style groove in it, but still keeps it real. You know, like the last album they put out even had like tinges of black metal. Unfortunately, they have since broken up, whereas the other three bands who did good stuff at the beginning of their career, now they're just releasing boring albums. But to quote a Dismember song, so is life. So I'm going to close this episode out with a Hooded Menace song. But Job, you might ask, why are you closing this out with a band you didn't even mention earlier? You know, like, and they're Finnish. Fucking Finns in a Swedish death metal podcast? Well, let me tell you something, buddy. This song I'm closing it with is a death metal band playing a cover of a theme song from an Italian horror movie. So I want you to listen to this and then compare it to the melodies you were hearing from Dismember. Let me know what you think. You know, I think they're pretty similar style of composition. So take it away, Hooded Menace.